I've got to say, I thought the football's been fantastic since the resumption, the Bundesliga, the Premiership, and I've loved actually watching a lot of football. It's been a nice respite from what's going on. But the pressures on the players are enormous, even the ones who there is a little bit of less sympathy for because they earn such vast amounts of money.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me on. Yes, you're absolutely right. The way that football came back from an entertainment perspective, from a quality of play, has been, I think, quite surprising. Probably not 100% of what it can be, but it's been really good. The load on the players has been an issue long before Corona actually slowed football down. We had a report published last year in which we showed that some of the players at the elite level in a 12-month period play up to 75, 80 games a year. And yes, you can talk about whether, based on their income, they should put a little bit of extra work in, but it's not just a question of what can be asked of them, but simply what their bodies and minds are able to take and what it does then to the performance of their teams and therefore, of course, the success of the clubs. And it shows very clear correlation that a lack of rest, a lack of care for their health will lead to more losses and will lead to poorer performances. And thus, it's not just a matter of taking care of the health of the player, which I think is a right of everybody, irrespective of their income, but it is a self-interest of clubs and national teams, etc., that their players are in a well-rested form when they are meant to step on the big stage and perform.
Yeah, and I'm at pains to say, Jonas, so this isn't about the elite on about 200, 300,000 euros a week or whatever. This is about 65,000 players you represent, and there's a hell of a lot of them who are paid significantly less than those kind of flashy headline figures as well. So what can be done is the question.
Well, look, on the calendar front, of course, the interests or the needs of the players are very different. You talk about the 65,000 we represent. The overload is very much focused in the elite. But across the board, many players actually on the other flip side of the coin, they don't get enough football. They don't have enough football to have a sustainable and well-financed career. So it is about rebalancing, I think, a little bit the opportunity for clubs to perform on different competition levels. But now individually speaking, I mean, what we've been addressing with especially the clubs and the leagues, FIFA, etc., over the last few months is that now for this elite level of players that we're talking about, they need mandatory rest periods. They have contractual rights to holidays. We need good models of load management. So resting a player here and there, they can play all the football that's there. And of course, we need to take precautions when it comes to traveling into regions where there may be still infection risk, etc. National team football eventually will come back. We don't know when it is outside of Europe. But it will come back, and it'll raise enormous questions about a player traveling from Europe into Latin America, for example, and what are the safety measures applied there, given that there's still a much higher risk at this point of infection. So it's all these things that need to be tackled. But long term, the calendar needs to be reviewed, and reviewing the calendar means reviewing competition structures and how we can get the best football, but also a manageable amount of football to everybody across the board.
Jonas, let me ask you, what do you think the attitude of governments to the football industry is at this point? I mean, we are at a point where potentially hundreds of smaller clubs could go to the wall before the year's out here. You obviously have concerns about the players, and you represent the players here. But it did seem to me that as the crisis unfolded, there was a loss of sympathy towards your union around the arguments that you were making on player layoffs and on wage cuts. Do you think in any way that may have affected the willingness of governments and public bodies to be supportive of many of the smaller clubs that may die?
Yeah, look, I mean, we have publicly a very skewed image of what professional sport is. And games like last night is what triggered public perspective. The reality is, as you said, there's tens of thousands of players around the world who are earning at minimum wage level or average wage level in a country. So just from a social perspective, they're just as vulnerable as anybody else in our economies. And so are, of course, the clubs. They're small businesses. Now, the response from government was very different. In some ways, there was maybe a little bit of a populistic run to challenge professional players to sacrifice. But if you look at some of the research we've done and what we've published recently, there was enormous amount of social activity, donations, foundations, whatever that players triggered and clubs and leagues triggered to help in this pandemic. But there is a lack of understanding of what the ecosystem of professional football is made up of. And that is a large number of very fragile and small businesses, which create, of course, the underbelly and also the cultural value of the game. And if they're not protected, I mean, just as an example, we have some leagues around the world which rely 40 to 50% of their revenue on match day income, meaning fans coming to stadia. If that's taken away, which of course it will be for quite some time still, they're simply not viable as businesses. And they are businesses. Of course, they're more than that, but in the end, they operate like businesses. And that means unemployment, that means layoffs, that means structures dying that have been built over decades. And it will not be so easy to recover those after the pandemic.